once again. Thank you all for tuning in. This is Nuance, and we will be speaking of petitioning in New York for elective offices and party positions without congressional lines in place. Yes, petitioning began today in New York, and once again, we don't have finalized districts. So we'll get into that, what it all means in a few minutes here, but let's start off with the intros. I'm Mike Scala, joined as always by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist in the chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on, Jay?
Tired of being cold. I don't know, the last couple of days, the temperature seems to have just dropped. And even though I've got my heater on, it just doesn't still feel comfortable. It's just tired of being cold, man. It's ready for this to be over. Let's get to spring already. Plan.
Yeah, yeah. I know what they say about the groundhog here that see it, I guess it didn't see its shadow. So that means that spring is coming sooner. I don't know.
I never could get that straight, which was which. So I don't know.
I take this call. Our friend Andre is calling us as he knows that we're beginning the podcast. I'm gonna call him back later. I'll text him. I'll text him
Right.
while he's talking and talk. We'll get to him later. If he wants to call in for the podcast, he can do that. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the spring. It is really nice this week in New York, and hopefully it stays that way. I don't like this back and forth, cold, warmer, cold, warmer. You know, I think people get sick that way. It messes with your immune system, and it's just not fun.
Yeah, last week there were like 2 days where it hit like 66. And like, that was much, much better. So, yeah, I got outside, took a nice stroll, got some sun. But yeah, it's back to this nonsense.
Yeah. Well, speaking of going back, I did want to mention a few things about Caucus weekend that I didn't get to cover last week. One of which was this here flyer. You see this nifty Rails and Trails flyer. This is a Queensling flyer, of course, talking about the Queensling project. It's got a little map of how it would look. It's got some nice graphic renderings here, the social media, the website, and a description of the project. Importantly, Queensling is transit equity for residents that face the longest commute to New York City. So one of the things that I did when I was in Albany, I took the chance to put a Queensling flyer in every lawmaker's mailbox, or at least as many as I could, right? I went to every floor of the LOB, Legislative Office Building, and you can just walk up and down the halls, and I had my bag with me, my flyers, and stuff one in every box, right? And I think it's important to do that, not only obviously for this particular cause, but whatever you're advocating for, I think trying to increase the brand recognition amongst the people who make decisions is important. Now, some people are going to say, well, what is the use? You're giving a Queensling flyer to people all over New York, assembly members and senators upstate. Maybe they just can throw it out. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are going to throw it out, but hopefully a lot of people are going to look at it. And even if they end up throwing it out, maybe someone on their team, maybe a staffer, maybe the member, him or herself, will see Queensling and think, oh, what is that? Oh, Queensling. Oh, okay, that's cool. You know, and then you move on to your next thing. But it's important, right? Because right now, for example, we have a letter that's a budget request for money to be allocated to the state budget for the next phase of the Queensling. Now, this has to go to committee, potentially. It's got to go on potentially for a vote in the budget. And so it's important for lawmakers, again, people making these decisions ultimately, to have some recognition as to what we're doing. And I think more of it needs to be done, right? And it's, you might call it a lobby day or have your terms for it, but I think groups like that and others need to be making that effort. Make the trip to Albany, try to make as many meetings even as you can, or do this. It doesn't cost you anything really, aside from the copies, to go and put one in every mailbox. You can do that in Albany, right? It's what it's there for. Outside their offices, there's a little box, and it's for memos. It's for people to put in their documents of advocacy, right? Do it, take advantage of that. Same thing on the city level, New York City Council. I think it's a good thing to do for brand awareness and name recognition, even if you think it's not gonna turn into something tangible right away. It's the accumulation of those efforts.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, good tip. Hopefully it does bear fruit.
Right. And it's funny, an assembly member once told me a story. He said that there was an email he would keep receiving about banning shark fin soup, I think it was. He said it was kind of obscure when he first got it, right? It was like some random email about we need to stop this practice, we need to ban shark fin soup. And he's like, what is this? I never heard of this. I don't care about this issue. And
The big
wasn't even
issue
on his
is
radar until he got the email, but he kind of disregarded it when he saw it. But he said that people would keep sending him these emails over and over and over again. And I said to him, well, was it the same email or was it different people writing a variation? He said, no, it was the same exact email, word for word, but it was coming from different people. So there must have been a website or some link people were clicking, click here to email your representatives about this, and automatically generates a form letter and sends it to them. Anyway, I think, well, what a waste of time. This is like this jump, they're getting the same thing. But he said to me, you wouldn't believe it, but the first time I saw it, I was like, what is this? I don't really know about it. He's like, by like the 5th or 6th time, he was like, okay, shark fin soup. I guess that's the real thing. People care about this. He was like, by like the 15th to the 20th one, he was like, we got to do something about the shark fin soup problem. Like, this is a problem. This, you know what I mean? Like, we need to solve it right away. And it was the same letter that people just kept, they just clicked a button and sent it to him. But he saw that it wasn't just one crazy person out there. There was a movement of sorts, right? There were a bunch of people who were at least taking the time to click that button and send that email, even if it was the same form letter. It meant something, right? And it got on his radar. We're all people. We kind of know how we operate as human beings, right? It's like you get these signals that reinforce messages. And yeah, we are prone to that. And I think we need to take advantage of that. That's how our government was intended to work, right? Some people look at it like, oh yeah, these people in government, they're just in their ivory tower and they're doing their own thing. They don't care about the average person. Yeah, but it's up to us to use psychology, in a sense, to get to this, right? And that's really what the system is intended to be. Yeah, do the form letters, do your advocacy, however you got to do it, but kind of just drill these messages in their heads, and they will respond to them.
Right. Yeah, it's I mean, it's a form of marketing too. I mean, it's just that repeated message over and over again. And just a side note, shark fin soup has been a major problem in Asia, particularly China and Hong Kong areas. So
yeah, I thought you were gonna say it was delicious, but I realized that you don't even eat meat. So
no, I would not know whether it's delicious or not, but I do know of the issue that it's actually, if I'm not mistaken, it is banned in certain places like Hong Kong, maybe Hong Kong and certain places in China. But people still make it.
right. So on the topic of reinforcing the message, the marketing aspect of it, right? I was walking through the hallways, and the LOB is kind of interesting if you've never been there. Each floor has two wings, if you wish, and there's a middle piece that kind of connects the two. So it's easy to lose track of if you've hit all the mailboxes on that floor or not. So you'll walk around a square shape, hitting all the mailboxes, but then that's only one side of the building. And then you have to remember to walk in that little corridor that connects the two sides, right? And the mailbox is there too. So you gotta hit the corridor, and then you gotta walk around the square on the other side. So you gotta make sure you're doing it in a methodical way to hit all these boxes. But I was making my rounds, and a guy, I didn't recognize this guy. He was on the phone talking. I was trying not to interrupt his conversation because he was kind of walking in the hall talking. And so then I was trying to hit the boxes on the other side where he was. Eventually I got back to where he was. He stopped me, and he pointed to a pin on his suit, and it had the assembly emblem on it. So apparently he was an assembly member, and he was signaling to me that he wanted me to hand him the flyer directly, right? So I said, oh, thank you. And I gave it to me. He goes, thank you. And so I got to do some of that. I think I was able to hand a flyer to someone's chief of staff. It might have been Jabari in the Senate. I think it might have been her chief of staff that said, I was putting it in the box, and she's like, I'll take that. So it's good when you have that personal contact, because it's probably going to stand out a little bit more. Maybe that won't be discarded as quickly. So that's nice. And when I was downstairs in the area connecting the LOB to the Capitol, heading towards the concourse, they call that outside, I saw Jumaane Williams, a public advocate in New York City. And so I shook his hand, and I leaned in and I said, thank you for your Queenslink advocacy. And it was loud. And he goes, huh? I said, Queenslink. He goes, oh, no doubt, no doubt. And he keeps walking. And again, that's one of those things where, yeah, he supports it. He's been to our press conferences. He's made statements about it. But getting that reinforcement, he's walking in Albany, someone stopping him. Hey, I appreciate what you're doing out there for Queenslink. That is going to mean something, right? That sets it above maybe all of the other issues that day he's thinking about, because now he had a real interaction with a person telling him they appreciate that, right? Something that he's doing. And that relates to the comment we had last week. Remember I said I'm in Albany, and these people coming up to me and they're saying, oh, Mike, appreciate what you're doing. It's like, okay, that's the feedback that tells you that what you're doing is reaching people, it means something to people, and it makes it meaningful to you, right? And so that in turn will increase my own advocacy on an issue the same way I would hope to influence others.
Right. And it helps keep it uh, relevant in their mind. It makes it kind of a top of mind issue when it's brought back up. It's reinforced in their head that, oh, this that people are talking about this. I need to pay attention.
Right. Now imagine again, a vote is coming up, for what's going to be in the budget, the state budget. Someone
Right.
mentions Queensland, maybe Khalil Anderson, right? Maybe Stacey Amato, one of our core supporters in the assembly, maybe James Sanders in the Senate. They mention Queensland. Well, now you've got everyone else in Albany at least having heard it in theory, right? At least the flyer went to their mailbox. And so people will be more likely now to say, oh, I've heard of Queensland. Okay, yeah, let's look at that, as opposed to these 1,000 other projects that maybe they never even heard of. And so, it's really important to keep that name out there. And again, more of that, right? It's again, I think it's a good lesson for any group or any person trying to advocate for something. It's that repetition. It's a war of attrition.
Right.
So definitely wanted to talk about that. The other point I wanted to make on Caucus, I didn't get to last week. I made a post on social media, but we didn't talk about it on the show, was Shyne. Shyne himself was in attendance.
That was my Shyne voice. Yeah, it's
Oh,
Shyne.
is that different from your Biggie voice?
I think that's my Biggie voice too. It's
Gotcha.
and what's the other guy? There's another guy. Something Black.
Gorilla Black.
Gorilla Black. Yeah.
That's even more obscure. But
Right.
Shyne had a run for a while, and yeah, that was the thing. And it was funny because Puffy signed him, so people were saying, "Oh, he's trying to recreate Biggie," right? That was the whole thing.
Right. Because he sounded like
He
Biggie.
sounded like him, same kind of voice. But his story is so fascinating. I mean, they really need to make a movie about the Shyne story, because whatever you think of him, whatever your opinion is, you can't deny that it's a fascinating story and a very unique one, in the sense that this man was deported, right? Deported from the US, has to go back to Belize. And
Right.
now,
And wasn't allowed to come back in.
right, absolutely. He was deported, and he tried. And there was a story, it's really crazy. So he was actually deported, I believe it was in 2009 under the Obama administration. And he was hoping that Obama would let him in. He was trying to reach out to him and say, hey, I'm Shyne, let me stay. And they were like, no, you got to go. Because as you may know, he was convicted in that nightclub shooting with Puffy and
Right.
Lopez and everything. He was trying, I guess, protect Puff in the fight or whatever happened. And
Right.
he did a prison term and was subsequently deported. He was reaching out to Obama for help, found none, was deported. Then he endorsed Mitt Romney, I think, in 2012, because he was still mad at Obama for not helping him. So
That's gonna help.
yeah. So in Belize now, not able to come back to the US, he runs for Congress down there, right? Ultimately becomes leader of the opposition party. Believe it or not, he is leader of the Conservative Party in Belize. But it doesn't mean that that's the same thing as Republicans in the US, because there are different scales, go to the Overton window, and right, it's different ideological lines. But at least as far as Belize politics are concerned, he is on the Republican, well, I shouldn't say that, the conservative side, right? But it's the opposition party, right? Because he is outnumbered. So he's in charge of the opposition. And his father used to be prime minister. I'm sure that helped, right?
Absolutely.
But in any event, he ascended to close, near the top of the country in Belize, politically speaking. Now
Right.
he's able to come back to the US on official business, and you will see him make appearances in the US. And just that aspect of it alone, I think, is so interesting and unique. How often does someone get deported, then get elected into a leadership position in the country they were deported to, and that enables them to come back to the US in that role?
Right. Yeah.
So
It's crazy.
really fascinating. And also the fact that he was at Caucus weekend unannounced. I didn't know he was going to be there. And all these elected officials from New York are on stage. In fact, I actually left the ballrooms when he got on stage. I didn't know that he was on stage, right? I had gone to take a break. I think I went to go take a seat outside, just chill for a bit. I think I had to talk to somebody, make a phone call or whatever. So I went back into the ballroom, and he's already on stage speaking, but I don't recognize it as Shyne immediately. I don't know who it is. It's like a dude in a suit, and he's coming from far away at first. So as I'm getting closer, I start hearing more and more about what he's saying, and then it's starting to take shape, he said, first, honestly, he kind of just sounded like a minister, and he was talking about the need for reparations and all this other stuff. But then he said something about something about Rikers Island and when he was in the system battling his case. And I'm thinking, oh, that's interesting. Who's this guy who was in the system? And at a certain point, he mentioned opposition party of Belize. And when he said that, then I knew who it was, right? Then I was close enough also physically to see him. And I was like, oh, wow, this is Shyne. And apparently, the part that I missed was before I walked in, when I was still outside, he had performed a song. I don't know what song it was. I'm guessing it was one of his hits, either Bad Boys or Bonnie and Shyne or whatever his top records were. But he performed part of the song and then went into his speech. And I found that to be so interesting, at least from my perspective of someone, myself, hip hop, politics, trying to put the two together. And here's someone who's doing that in his own way, right? A hip hop star on Bad Boy Records, now in a high political position, and he is able to make a public appearance like that at a political conference, perform a song, a rap song that he's done, and then go into a speech and do it pretty seamlessly, right? Like no one even batted their eye at it. No one was like, wow, this is crazy. It might have been surreal, the fact that this is all unfolding before our eyes, but it was normal also. It was like, yeah, of course, here's Shyne. The DJ threw on a Shyne record. He's going to rap along to it. Now he's going to talk to us,
Right. And if I remember correctly, part of his story is a little even more interesting because in that journey, he also became an Orthodox Jew.
Yeah.
And he was dressing kind of like the Hasidic Jews.
Yeah.
I don't know if he still does that, but at one point, so that could be where you said he sounded like he was some sort of a religious figure with the way he was speaking, and from those studies, that could be where that comes from.
Yeah, definitely. My very first impression was he seemed like some kind of Baptist minister or something like that. Like he was preaching to the choir. That was his style of delivery, right?
Right.
So really, really interesting stuff though. And again, this is why I like going to some of these events. Sometimes you ask yourself, why am I trekking to Albany for this like same old political stuff? But it does get very interesting when you have these experiences.
Right. Yeah. Sounds good. I wonder what he performed.
Yeah,
like what do you perform at that? Like, because at the time, I would imagine like his songs have certain messages in them from back then.
Right.
And like, what would you perform now of your hits?
Yeah, but that's the thing, and especially someone like that, he only had like one or two, maybe three songs that were even on the radio and got heavy rotation like that. It had to be one of those songs, and you're right, they probably all have some suspect messaging, at least as far as we try and do today, right? Something that might be
right
there. Yeah.
So I'm curious what it would have been.
But he might have also self-censored himself on certain lines. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true too.
I asked Malik, and he said he wasn't sure. It had to be either Bad Boys or Bonnie and Shyne. I think it was one of them, and there might have been one other, but there weren't that many that really made it to radio. Where if he's just randomly at an event and the DJ throws it on, it's got to be one of those hits.
Right, it has to be. Yeah, it had to be. So yeah, it's interesting. It'd be very interesting indeed. So
yeah. Well, it is an interesting time in New York politics, certainly, because today marks the first day of petitioning, which is the process you have to undergo to make it onto the ballot, right? Whether you're running for a public office or party position. But we've known that over the past few years, there's been controversy over the makeup of these districts, how these lines are drawn, lawsuits and so forth. Well, when it comes to the congressional lines, the process continues. In fact, we thought we had lines that were approved 9-1 by the Independent Redistricting Commission. But the state legislature, and we have to say it is controlled by Democrats, they voted down these lines. Now, some concerns were raised. I know Senator Gianaris made points. He said that he didn't like that counties were being split in these lines. He didn't like that it seemed like some looked like they were drawn to protect incumbents, which they're not supposed to do. And so he had his concerns for why he voted against it. But nonetheless, these lines that were approved by the commission were shot down. A new set of maps has been proposed by the legislature now, but as far as I know, at press time live here. I don't think they've been actually confirmed or finalized yet. If they have, we certainly started the first day of petitioning, without set lines again. Now, to me, this speaks to the system being broken in some respect. This shouldn't be happening. I don't think there ever should be a situation where you begin a petitioning period without having district lines in place.
Yeah, it just you know, it just seems like an oxymoron. Because you have to petition for the district, but there's no district lines.
Right. Right.
Like so it just makes a mess later because so it
Yeah.
means people are gonna go out and they're gonna get more, you're gonna have to get way more than you thought. But then there's the possibility that a lot of those could be thrown out. It's just it
Right.
just
What happened 2 years ago was it was a real mess where they had a petitioning period, then the lines got redrawn, and they said, okay, if you made the ballot successfully, because remember, after these petitions are submitted, there are legal challenges, right? Election lawyers come
right,
in, like myself, and they defend them or they attack them and they say, this petition is good, this one is not good. And then you see who's on the ballot after that process. It's an administrative process with the Board of Elections, and then it goes to court often as well. And then there are appeals
right,
often as well, right? So this is a whole big process. Once that is all set, all the dust settles on that, you've got a ballot, right? Then hopefully that's the end of it. 2 years ago, it wasn't, because the lines were redrawn even after the petitioning period. So what ended up happening was they had said, all right, if you qualified for the ballot in that first petitioning period, you are good, you're safe. But now, hold on, you're safe, but you just petitioned for a seat that doesn't technically exist anymore. At least that district doesn't exist
right,
anymore. So what do you do? And so they made this weird rule. They said, well, you could uh, submit a one-page form declaring yourself a candidate for that seat that you petitioned for, but in any district in your county, because the lines were redrawn. And so, like, some people were in a district that really didn't exist. It wasn't even like a slight modification. It was like, I'm running for the seat. It's an open seat. Oh, wait a minute. It's not an open seat anymore. That district doesn't even exist. It was carved into these other three districts with incumbents in all of them, or whatever. So like it completely changed the whole map. And
right,
so they said, you could declare yourself for any of the seats that exist now after the process is redrawn, which is odd because you've got these voters signing a petition saying, we want you on the ballot in this district. And
right,
it could have been from a whole different part of Queens or Brooklyn or whatever county you're in, right? Like, let's say you're in the Rockaways, you get all signatures there, and then you say, after the process, you know what, I'm going to declare myself for a seat in Astoria. Well, no one in that part of Queens even signed a petition for you saying you should be on the ballot. You got on the
right,
ballot by petitioning other voters entirely. And so that
right,
was a very strange thing to do. And then what they did on top of that was they had a second petitioning period, which was an option for those who didn't make the ballot the first time around or didn't petition at all the first time around, which is a second bite at the apple. You're not on the ballot now, you still want, okay, here you go. You have another 5 weeks to petition under these new lines. So very convoluted, very questionable in many respects, not an ideal situation to say the least. And hopefully we're not in for a repeat of that, but we're not getting off on the right foot, starting off the first day of petitioning with no lines for Congress in place.
well, what if they put a rule in place that if those petition lines weren't settled on by petition day, then it would revert back to the previous petition lines,
Right.
the, the previous district lines.
There was something like that done. There's something called latches, which is a legal concept. It's similar to the statute of limitations, but it basically says you waited too long to bring this suit for the interests of justice to be served by
Right,
the result that you're seeking, right? And so that was done, and that was why some of the lines were not thrown out for the election 2 years ago, with the caveat that if they were drawn unconstitutionally, because if it was done under the same process where some were knocked out, well, now you have a technical argument for why they should remain in place for this election. However, the judge back then said, the court had said that they would revert back to how they were just for the sake of this election, but they
right,
would have to go through the correct process after the election. And
right.
that could be subject to challenges, in its own right.
I think, I mean, that would just, I mean, the one thing, like, I think we definitely agree on is that, you shouldn't be going into petitioning without district lines. It just makes
Yeah.
a mess. It doesn't make any sense. And so
But
look, if you
here's,
guys can't get it together before petitioning starts, then we're going to use the lines that were previously drawn for this election. And after petitioning ends here, then you're going to continue that process of re.
Here's the thing, though. Different parties have different rights in the process. So when you say the lines that were drawn, you have to ask by who, right? Because
Sure, but
so here's what happened, right? The Independent Redistricting Commission drew the lines. Now the law is that the legislature has to approve the lines, and maybe that part we could debate. I don't know if that needs to be in there now, but that is what the law is now. So what ends up happening is they draw the lines and they submit these maps, and they said, okay, February 27th, we're going to start petitioning. We'll have it done before that. Don't worry about it. You're good, right? They submitted their lines before the 27th, before today. But at the last minute, the state legislature voted them down, which they have a right to do. And so now if you say, okay, the 27th comes along, you've got to go back to the last lines. Which lines are you using? And does that incentivize the legislature to wait to the last minute every time or run out the clock?
well, I think it's kind of the same situation though, right? Like if the legislature is voting them down, isn't it really going to come down to who controls the legislature and if those lines benefit their party,
Right. Because what
and they're
happens
going to
now
vote it, they're
is,
going to
yeah,
vote it down.
right. Because what happens now is the legislature comes up with a new map and they're saying these are the ones we want to use. But now this new
Right.
map is subject to lawsuits, right? Because let's say, the Democratic legislature says this is the maps, these are the maps that we want. The Republicans are probably going to come in and say, well, you drew these maps just to benefit Democrats. You don't like the
Right.
independent ones that were drawn, which you say favored incumbents, Republican incumbents, right? But so now they're arguing over whose maps benefit whom. And yeah, it goes to court again. And so I think there's a danger in, I mean, you could say that it needs to be set by the 27th, by the first day of petitioning, and I agree, but you also have to define which maps are you using and what is the process to determine which maps are used? Because for
The ones that
argument's sake,
were used in the
let's say the
last
Democratic
election.
legislature waits to the last minute, passes lines right before the deadline, and now it's too late to challenge them.
The lines that were used in the last election.
Oh, in the last election.
Yeah.
Yeah, but okay. The problem is that those are unconstitutional, probably, especially if it's a redistricting year where you had to reapportion the districts as a result of the
Yeah,
census.
but they didn't get their job done in time. So, I mean, this really can't be helped. Like, do
Yeah.
your job without this pitter pat back and forth. Do your negotiation like you're supposed to and get it done before the time is done, or else it goes back to the last election where we did have the successful ones.
But the
So,
last election, though, to be clear, also had the same issue, right? Where they were deemed
sure, sure.
unconstitutional. So now we're going back to an unconstitutional set of lines, or we're going back
Well,
2 elections ago now.
well, no, we'd go back to the last one, so it wouldn't be overly complicated. But I mean, the process would have to start somewhere,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so, you know, because what it is, it's the different parties jockeying for what's going to be beneficial for their party when really is kind of counter to having an independent body draw
Yeah.
up the lines in the first place.
Right. Right. And
If
this independent party voted 9-1, and the Republicans in the legislature were touting that. It was 9-1, a bipartisan, 9-1. It wasn't like all
right,
Republicans voting one way, Democrats another. 9-1. So they were saying that it was overwhelming. Why did the Democrats vote against it? But I agree with you that there needs to be a timeline, just like when you petition, right? There's a whole timeline, and they say
yeah,
you've got this window to submit your signatures, right? You can only gather them in this period. They must be submitted on time. Then you must file your legal challenges on time, and there's 3 days to file general objection, 6 days for specific. Then you have a statute of limitations, very very short one to file any lawsuits. It's a very expedited process because they know that the ballot
right,
needs to be finalized and set by a certain time. I think there
right,
should be a similar process in the law about the timeline of drawing these maps. And so, for example, the independent commission should have had a deadline
right.
weeks ago to give if you're going to give the legislature time to vote on it, yes or no, then you got to give them a proper time to get that done prior to the petition. But not just that, but any legal challenges, right? Just like again, when you run for office, there's a window for legal challenges and everything. There should be a window for legal challenges to the maps that ends prior to today, the first day of petitioning. The legal challenges, if any, should have been resolved by now.
Or what about this possibility? Since the whole point of making an independent body do the decision, drop the maps, is so there is no partisan input in here, so it doesn't benefit one or the other. Take away the legislature's power to approve them, and just you have to deal with what the independent body has put forth, because that's
Right.
what the purpose of
That's
having them.
that's a possibility as well, subject to litigation. All right. If they want to argue that it was drawn unconstitutionally, I think they can get to make that argument in court, but that should be done prior to now. And they had 2 years to do it. So
Right.
there's no reason why this needs to be pushed up against the petitioning window.
Right. And see, that's where I think some of the political strategy comes into play, because people will push the things like that to delay something or whatever whatever it is. That's why if you set these hard deadlines or take away this and actually put that power in the hands of that independent body, then that takes some of that political meddling out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's crazy. In the chat, it's talking about well, there's a potential. The independent commission should make the plan and have citizens vote for it.
Hmm.
Think about that.
Well, that's an interesting idea, and it actually relates to something else I want to talk about pertaining to election law. And so we'll get to that. But yes, there is a public speaking, right? A public hearing period, or whatever you call it, where they, as part of the process, the commission presents their maps to the public and they seek their input. But of course, it's not a vote, and some people will argue how much input does the public really have in any of these things. Sometimes it seems like they do it just to check a box. Okay, we got the public's input. What's the next step? Without actually taking their input into consideration a lot of the times. So it is interesting, but how would you do it? I guess is my question logistically. I mean, first of all, does it have to coincide then with election day? So would it have had to be, for example, last November? So then you would really have to do it. Okay, so let's say you make that the thing. It's got to be presented to the public on election day, the November prior to the election.
It
Okay,
has to be, yeah.
that would be, I guess, that would be logistically a way to accommodate that. Then you have to ask, how are you presenting that to them? I mean, when they go to vote, are they going to get a booklet of maps that they
Right.
can go through? How are
Right.
they, how are they supposed to vote on that?
Potentially, how about I would imagine in the districts they have the statistics for how many Democrats, how many Republicans are in each district. So that would be a line item on there saying there's this many Democrats, this many Republicans in this
You know what
district.
happens though?
You agree or not agree with this, or I don't know. And then what happens if the public doesn't agree on that
Right.
map?
That's what I was going
Then
to
you
say.
got
So
that
normally
might
what
be
ends up
hard to
happening,
do.
referendums tend to pass, especially if they're confusing or not a lot is known about them. Like if you were to present the public, for example, with every single map for
Right.
every congressional district in New York,
Right.
unless there's a big push to vote no, the default is going to be yes. I think from what we've seen, most people when they see something that like, yeah, sure, they look fine to me. I don't know. They just say yes, right? But then what could happen is, especially if you start going district by district,
Right.
what if the voters of a district have to decide their own district lines, and then you have, let's say it's a Democratic district, you've got the politicians, elected officials in that district saying vote no on this proposal because this gives the Republicans too much power. Then they're all going
Right.
to vote no on it, and vice versa, right? Republicans will say vote no. Then it becomes maybe even more political than it is now.
Right.
When we're
Yeah.
supposed to be doing this in a neutral way, in a sense. I mean, not completely. We've talked about people are people, and they make considerations for various reasons, but even though you can't completely divorce politics from any process, you could try to reduce the influence of politics. And I think that's kind of the purpose of the independent commission, to try to
Right.
do it in a politically fair or neutral way.
I'd say, let to combat that, let the independent commission's decision be the final decision on the maps. Let that run a couple of elections and see if how
Pending
that's.
litigation, though, right? I still think you should have a process where you can file a lawsuit and say the independent maps are not constitutional. That's possible.
But they still, all of that has to be wrapped up
Prior
before
to
petitioning
prior to the
starts.
first day. I agree. I think that's, hopefully we can all agree that there should be a strict deadline in place, right? I mean,
Right.
can we start there? Then we
So
can
so
debate about what the actual logistics are and different parameters of it. But can we agree that we should not be going into petitioning period without
right.
final district lines?
Right. So in that case, you could say that the independent commission has a deadline to submit the maps by this deadline, and from this deadline to this deadline is the legal challenges
Challenge
deadline.
period. Right. And the
Everything
courts
has to
know,
be
right, exactly. And the courts also know, as they do in election law cases when someone's running, the courts know they're on the same deadline. And that's why
right,
election law cases take priority, right? When we go to
right,
court to argue election law cases, other lawyers sometimes get annoyed that our cases are taking precedence
right,
and theirs has to go on the back burner. One lawyer even asked me, like, what is this? What is this election law stuff? He was there for his case, and the whole courtroom was tied up on election law stuff. And he was like, what is it? I said, it's election law. He goes, yeah, but what is it? What are you even arguing? And I said, who should be on the ballot? He was, oh, people don't even know that. But
right, right,
that's the
right.
thing, right? It's a very strict timeline, and the courts know that. The courts have to get these
Right.
things decided according to that timeline. So the
It
same
sounds
thing
like
should apply.
it sounds like we just solved it. So I mean, setting these deadlines and
Yeah.
a timeline, and have that legal challenge period, that things have to be wrapped up in that time, so the courts know it, the lawyers know it, and I think we just solved it. So who do we get on the phone and make this happen?
Yeah. Well,
Make some
unfortunately,
calls. Get back up there to
this may
Albany.
require. See, the thing is this: to enact this whole system, we're probably going to need a constitutional amendment to the New York State Constitution, which would probably be done by referendum. So that would be put up to the people. But I would have faith in the people saying yes to that proposal.
I think the people I think the people would be more apt to support that, especially knowing that people are going into petitioning and there are no district lines, and the people that they're signing to be on the ballot might not even be representing them because of this whole mess and the political thing. I think that would have bipartisan support, if you know.
Yeah, and
So
hopefully
yeah,
everyone can
let's
agree this is a problem. Why don't we make that the
let's
full question of the week?
let's get on the horn and start making some calls. And yeah, let's get this referendum going. And here we go. We got it.
All
We
right,
saw.
so we can speak about why there needed to be referendum in another case in a minute. But before we do that, I want to put out the poll question of the week. I guess we can keep it general and not make it only about New York, but
Sure.
this idea of independent commissions versus legislatures, right? Who gets to draw the map? So let's take a crack at it. The poll question of the week is: do you agree that state legislatures should have the option of voting down proposed legislative maps made by independent districting commissions?
Okay. We'll see what people have to say about that. We'll see. Um, we had some comments here. We need more transparency and democracy. People should vote, not politicians. Parties should not control the redistricting. Yeah. So,
Right. And that's also why I think it's important to preserve the avenue for legal challenges. I understand those can get abused as well, and sometimes those
right.
look like they're hyper partisan. But
Sure.
because we're trying to reduce the influence of politics and politicians making decisions about what their seats look like, I do think that we want courts to be able to determine what is constitutional and what isn't, right? And there are different rules that need to be followed. So even now, for example, when the lawmakers proposed their new maps after the independent commission's maps were shot down, they're only supposed to change them, I think, by up to 15% or something. There are boundaries they're supposed to play within. And if they don't, they find themselves subject to lawsuits. So that option, I think, needs to be there, but it does need to all be wrapped up prior to the period of petitioning.
Right. Listen, like I said, I think we just solved it. So, I mean, what's next on our docket?
Yeah. What else you got for us, right?
Yeah.
Well, all right. So speaking of the docket, I wanted to talk about this case that came down. It relates to election law as well. And it's something that we actually talked about from a political perspective on Nuance. We talked about the New York City Council taking action to allow non-citizen permanent lawful residents to vote in municipal elections in New York City. This was obviously the
Right.
subject of legal challenges. A decision just came down from the appellate division, second department, which is actually here in Queens, right? We're part of the second department. They struck down the law. So they said that the city council acted unlawfully in granting non-citizens the right to vote. And they analyzed this from a few different perspectives. They did look at the New York State Constitution, and they make reference to the fact that the Constitution talks about citizens voting. Now,
Right.
the defense to that was, well, it doesn't say only citizens can vote. It says it talks about citizens voting, but it doesn't limit it to just citizens. But it was enshrined in the law that citizens were the ones who were able to vote. And the court decided that in order to change that, the city couldn't just pass a law locally to do it. They would actually need a constitutional amendment, because there's language in there, and we won't get into the details too much, but they start talking about, you need an amendment to change the manner in which officials are elected, essentially. So
Right.
they said that that would have had to go to the people, and this is consistent with what we see in the chat, right? That the people should decide this. This shouldn't have been a city council vote.
Right.
What I find most interesting from a legal perspective about all of this is they didn't only analyze the case under the Constitution of New York, they also looked at the state election law, because the election law also makes references to citizens voting. But they said that the city law that granted non-citizens the right to vote violated the Constitution, yes. It did not violate the state election law, they said. Why is that? Well, there's a provision in the state election law that says that if there's any other provision of law out there that conflicts with what's in the election law, any newer provision, go with that newer provision instead of what's in here. And so they were saying, well, there is a newer city law out there, this one, saying that non-citizens can vote. And so because the state election law says, well, any other provision out there supersedes this, they said, as far as the election law was concerned, that city law did supersede the state election law. Now, the argument there was that only conflicting provisions of state law could supersede that state election law. Whereas, the other side said, no, it doesn't specify state law. It says any other provision of law. So even a city law could supersede the state law. This is getting very technical, but it's important when it comes to how many signatures one needs to run for office in New York City. For example, there's always been this tension between the New York City Charter, city law, right, and the state election law about the number of signatures you need for city council. We'll use that as an example. In the city charter, it says 450 signatures are needed. In the New York State election law, it says 900 signatures are needed. Well, which one wins? Is it 900 or is it 450? Every election lawyer always said, to be prudent, go with the 900, because there isn't clarity on this from a legal perspective as to which prevails. There is that provision in the state election law that says any provision out there that supersedes us, go with that. But there was some debate as to whether it had to be another state law provision or if even a city provision, even because don't forget, we're talking about New York City. What if some other small municipality somewhere in the state, not nowhere near as massive as New York City, voted to do something different from what the state election law said, right? So some people said that that wouldn't make sense, that only state law, maybe other provisions of state law could conflict with the election law and supersede it. But no, the court in this case specifically, even though it shot down the non-citizens voting law, it said it didn't run afoul of the state election law because the state election law allows any other law to supersede it. So that would suggest that the city charter's 450 requirement supersedes the state election law's 900 requirement. And now if there was a case about how many signatures one needed for city council, you could use this as precedent to argue that 450 is your answer, right? So this might come up, let's say, again, someone files their petition, they have however many signatures, they get challenged at the BOE level, right? They go to court. After the process all plays itself out, they're left with somewhere between 450 and 900, right? Their lawyer is arguing you only need 450 because the city charter says that. The person trying to knock them off the ballot, their lawyer says, no, you need 900. The state election law says that. Now, at least we have some precedent that you could point to, because as far as I know, there wasn't before. I've been in cases myself where the court declined to answer the question. It was not a thing they wanted to get into. Sometimes these conflict of law questions are complicated and esoteric, confusing, obscure. They're known to be the most difficult area of the law. And so if a court can resolve a case without answering that type of question, it usually will, to not get itself into trouble even going down that path. But in this particular case, they made clear that, in their view, at least according to the Appellate Division, Second Department, a city law can supersede the state election law. And so if I was a lawyer now and my client was about to be knocked off the ballot for having between 450 and 900 signatures, I would point to this case and say
Right.
that there is precedent that says that the city law prevails and 450 is your number. Don't take this as legal advice, right? This is just for informational purposes. This is what's considered dicta. In other words, it isn't the holding of the case. It's a little bit of an aside. I'm saying it is precedent because you can certainly point to it and think make a great argument using it, but
Right.
it
It will
isn't
be up to the
guaranteed.
judge.
It's not guaranteed, right? And other courts can come out differently on it as well. So just keep that in mind that it's not rock solid. In fact, the most prudent advice is still to go for the 900 because why not? You get more signatures if you can do it. It's a campaigning opportunity and you're playing it extra safe. Go for 3 times as many as 900, right? Pretend 900 is your target and go above that. With that said, you do have a case to point to now if you're ever in that situation of being under 900.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And whoa, you said if I were a lawyer, you actually are a lawyer. So now you've got something in your toolkit if you need it, potentially.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. If I were a lawyer in that situation, if my
Right. Right.
client, right, was being sued and they were trying to knock him off the ballot or her off the ballot for falling short of 900, but having above 450, I would certainly point to that case at this point.
Right.
It's precedent. And in Queens, it really should be highly persuasive given that this is a second department case. Queens is part of the second department. So I found it interesting that the court even tackled that, right? Because they could have disposed of this case on constitutional grounds, as we talked about. The first thing I said was that it ran afoul of the state constitution, and you would need a constitutional amendment to change the requirements of voting in New York. So they said that. That's why the non-citizens voting law had to be struck down. They could have ended it there. They could have punted on the election law question, but they went out of their way to say, while it runs afoul of the Constitution, it doesn't run afoul of the state election law because the state election law has that carve out for any other provision. I'm telling you,
Right.
I've had at least one case where I made that argument, that same argument, that the election law is superseded by the city because it has that any other provision will supersede us. And that was the response from the other side. I believe it was New York City at the time arguing, the New York City Board of Elections, I believe, arguing that it has to be state law that supersedes the election law, which was weird because they routinely go with that city charter's number all the time. So how could the New York City Board of Elections not defend the city charter? In every election, they go by 450. They never go by 900. But when it suited their purpose for this particular case, I believe they were trying to argue that it didn't apply, just to this one case, which I found to be strange. But nonetheless, there was never any clarity. The judge refused to even go down that road. And so now at least we have some clarity on that question.
Right. 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 So, and this does tie into that other thing we were going to talk about, what happened in San Francisco.
Yeah, I think you sent me an article. Was it someone on their board of elections? Maybe they call it the commissioner of elections or something like that. But they appointed a non-citizen commissioner, right?
Right. San Francisco appointed, this was the first non-citizen they to serve on the elections commission. She was born in, I believe it was Hong Kong, or whatnot. She's an immigrant, born in Hong Kong. She immigrated to the U.S. in 2019, to be a graduate student. And this is a result of, there was a 2020 measure to remove the citizenship requirement to serve on San Francisco boards, commissions, and advisory bodies. So she was sworn in to represent, I'm not sure what district it was she was in, but I think some people are getting a little bit upset. This doesn't give her the right to vote.
Mm-hmm.
She still is not legally permitted to vote.
Yeah, and I
What?
believe we saw that. This is San Francisco, right?
Right.
I believe we saw that they narrowly carved a path for some non-citizens to vote. For example, in school board elections, if they had a child in the school district or something like
Right.
that. But I don't think she qualified for any of that.
Right, right. This for the position that she's in, she can participate in like creating and overseeing policy. Um, she
Well,
can advocate for immigrant rights.
mhm.
She can help do what she wants to do is help influence voter outreach. So she pointed out that there are immigrants, especially immigrants that come from her community, that are citizens, can vote, but may not be as good with the language,
Mhm.
and there aren't the type of materials that would kind of
You
properly
okay? So I've got some
educate.
questions here. Number one, let's make it clear. When you say she can't vote, are you saying she can't vote in her capacity as a commissioner, or are you saying she can't vote in her local elections?
Her local elections.
Okay. So she still can vote as a commissioner. For example, and I don't know exactly how San Francisco works, but I would assume it's similar in some respects to New York, where the commissioners will vote on a matter, like an election law matter, right? If someone, for example, should be on the ballot, maybe one side has an argument in one direction, the other side is arguing in the other direction. Sometimes there needs to be a resolution, and you have a recommendation from the attorney, but the commissioners will vote on the resolution of that matter. I'm assuming she'll get to vote on that as well in her role, right?
I think she's able to vote on something like that. So it said
Yeah.
that she can participate in creating and overseeing policy for the Department of Elections. So contribute to like the development of procedures and things. So maybe she can vote on those types of things.
Mm.
But in elections, she doesn't have the right to vote.
Okay.
She's not a citizen.
But then the other thing is that she said that there are many immigrant voters in her community who can vote, who are citizens, and they don't
Right.
have access to resources, or maybe it's not in their language or whatever. But why
Right.
does she need to be a commissioner of elections in order to be an advocate in her community?
I don't think she has to be, but I think it was more like, the opportunity is there and she wanted to try and able to and she was able to do it.
It's a little strange, and I don't pretend to know what the law is in San Francisco or California and all that, but the idea that you could be part of your board of elections, right, as we call it in New York,
Right.
and not be able to vote in an election. It's a little
Right.
strange. It kind of reminds me of candidates who were running for attorney general of New York who weren't lawyers, or at least weren't licensed to practice law in New York. And
Right.
technically, there's no requirement. And people think that there is. There's no legal requirement or constitutional requirement that you are that. People just, I think,
Right.
assume that you should be. And it would be awkward if you were the attorney general of New York and your name had to go on all these court filings and you weren't even a lawyer who was licensed to practice in New York. And so it reminds
Right.
me of that. I don't know. It's a little odd to me
It
that
it is I find it a little odd also.
you could be a commissioner of elections and not be able to vote in any election.
Right. That'd be like being undocumented, but being a manager in ICE or something. I don't know. It just
Yeah, I mean, because what really qualifies someone like that to say who's entitled to run for office or not if you can't even vote for them? You know,
right. And I do understand the issue that people would have with it. And that point is a very good point. If you're not eligible to vote, then really should you have any kind of voice in the procedure, um, period. Especially if you're a non-citizen. So yeah, I can understand people's hesitation and confusion at this situation.
yeah. I mean, what do
Now, what
you
I do,
think? Do you think that people should be eligible to serve in that capacity if they can't vote?
I don't think so. If they're non-citizens, I don't think they should be, because that's helping to shape some of the laws that citizens are going to be governed by.
Well, to be fair, though, she also would be governed by those laws, whether she's a citizen or not.
Right, absolutely, but she can leave at any time.
I can leave at
So
any time too. You can,
that's
anyone
true.
can leave.
That's true.
Can you
It's
get back
just
in? Is the question.
yeah, right. Yeah, I don't think she should be eligible for that. Now, I think you mentioned earlier that there was some provisions that allowed people to vote even if they weren't citizens in the school elections that if they had children in the system. I can understand that.
Mhm.
I can understand giving your vote then. If your child's allowed to be in the school system and you're a parent of those children, I can understand your voice should be heard
I
a
get
little
that.
bit more than this.
Right. But doesn't that also get a little bit sticky, even when you look at it in the other direction? Because you have people trying to opt out, for example, paying school taxes, right? Because they say they don't have kids in the system,
Right.
or their kids graduated. My children are adults now, so why am I still paying money for the school? People will say that. I always feel like, listen, we're part of a society that really shouldn't matter whether you have kids in the district or not. I don't think that really should be determinative here.
For that, yeah, but I mean, if you have children in the school system, I mean, I can see an argument for you having a voice in that system.
Right. But does that mean that, again, the converse of that, people who don't have children in the school system, should they be deprived of a voice in the system?
No, I think they should. If you're citizens, it's yeah, you still got the voice. You're
They
paying
should
the
have a
tax.
voice in the system whether you have children or not, you're saying?
Right.
Okay. So that really
Um,
is almost irrelevant that she has children in the system because you're saying everyone should have a voice. Everyone should be able to vote.
well, it depends on whether she's a citizen or not.
No, because why would that
This
matter? You're saying even as a non-citizen, she should be able to vote because she has children. Oh, so you're saying that's okay. So if you're a non-citizen without kids in the school system, you
so
shouldn't
if
vote.
you're right, right. So if you're here as a permanent resident and whatnot, and you've got kids in the system, right? Normally, you're not able to vote even if you're a permanent resident. But if you've
Right.
got kids in the system and you have this residency, then I can see an argument for
But
you
then,
being able to
okay,
participate
but that gets
in
back to I think to
school.
my original issue though of we're either shutting people out of the system or not. I mean, if we're saying that you don't have a kid, and that's not a reason to shut you out if you're a citizen, but we should shut you out if you're non-citizen, even though we just gave the non-citizen with the kid the right to vote. That seems contradictory.
I don't see how would that be contradictory? I think for the citizens, our citizenship gives us that right to vote, period. That doesn't matter, citizen or non-citizen, right? For a permanent resident, they don't have the rights to vote there because they're not citizens, but they do have permanent residency. But if you have a kid in that system, then yeah, I can see an argument for
Yeah,
allowing them to vote in those elections.
I
But
see
for a
the
citizen,
argument. I see
got
the argument
blanket.
as well, but I think it just opens the door to the other side of that, which is why I don't have a kid in the system. Therefore, I should be able to opt out. And
I
we're
guess
saying that
people wanted to say
you
that.
should be part of the system whether you have a kid in it or not. And if we're saying that, then it shouldn't matter whether the non-citizen has a kid or not. That shouldn't even be a question whether you have kids. Then you can either vote in it or you can't.
Yeah, but I think the opposite that you're talking about is less about voting, but more about paying a tax on it.
Sure, or just having a voice, being included in the system, and however
Yeah,
that
but a
works.
monetary voice versus being able to vote, I think is a little different because one actually diminishes what's in your bank account, and the other one
Mhm.
is whether you choose to exercise it or not. Um, so I think one, I agree with your point as far as, whether you have a kid in the system or you don't have a kid in the system, if you're a citizen, this is a part of our society, right? Ultimately, this benefits our society. You went through the system, you benefited from the system as well.
Right.
You're helping to perpetuate it to make sure that we can keep this going strong. So I don't think opting out in that situation is an option there. Um, and so, like I said, the only other thing is that citizens should have the right to vote. That's kind of a benefit of being a citizen. We have these blanket rights. And if you're a permanent resident, like I said, I can see an argument for. I'm not saying I 100% agree with this. I can see an argument for it, um, for parents who have children in the school system and they're permanent residents to be able to vote in those elections, period.
Yeah. To
Not
me,
talking about general.
it just it doesn't it just strikes me as discriminatory against those who don't have kids in the school system. If you're giving them special privileges, right?
How? How does that be?
Non-citizens now who don't have kids in the school system are being left out, but you're giving the right to sit to non-citizens who do have kids in the school system. So you're making the determination based on whether someone has kids in the system or not.
Because it's the school system and it's their kids, the parents having an input into
Right.
what's
But
affecting the
so
children.
I don't think you could have it both
Right.
ways. I think either we're all invested in this and we all have a voice in this, or we don't, or we're going to pick and choose who does and who doesn't.
Well, if you make that argument, it'd be the same argument for voting for any type of position or political office.
Yeah,
You're
but
like,
who's going to make that argument that you have to have kids to vote aside from a school board or something?
Well, that's what I mean. Only in the school board. I'm talking just school board type of situations where a permanent resident would be able to do it.
Right, right. No, I hear you. I understand there's an argument for it. To me, it just
Yeah.
strikes me as discriminatory against those who don't have children. It's like, why are we making that the determination here? We all should be invested in this. I understand allowing or not allowing non-citizens to vote not being a separate consideration, right? But the idea of we're going to give some non-citizens the right to vote if they have kids, then that just leaves out the ones who don't. Then it's like saying that the ones who don't have kids aren't truly invested in the school system. I think we all should be.
Well, yeah, we do have some investment in the school system, but they have a much more direct investment if they
Now
have.
they do now, but they're not always going to. I mean,
No, no.
yeah, it's
I mean, if your kids aren't in the system, then yeah, you
you're
wouldn't
voting
have.
on policy potentially that could be in place for 20, 30 years. You're not gonna have kids in the system then anymore.
That's true too.
And people who don't have kids now could have kids in the future. I mean, it seems
That's
like
true.
a weird distinction to make. You have to have kids in the system now in order to have a vote. Well, hold on. Everyone has to pay taxes whether they have kids in the system now, right? We're all the school system
That's
exists as part of our society, whether or not we have kids. It's just a part of what we contribute to, and it affects us, and we affect it, right? Like I don't think we
yeah.
should be making legal distinctions based on who has kids now in that school. But
Yeah, I can see
I
that
get the
argument
argument
as
for
well.
it.
I can see that argument as well. Yeah.
So, all right, a couple more things. We had a poll question last week, and in fact, more is happening on that. I wanted to actually go off on a little bit of an aside, but it's related to what we're talking about. So let me just say it now. You
Uh-oh.
know, you remember in 2012, Jay, we first got involved in local politics, right, here in New York, and
Yes.
it's been a journey, right? 12 years later, this actually, from what I'm being told, this is the first year that my name is going to appear on an official Democratic Party petition. Because from what I'm told, the Queens County Democratic Party here locally is putting me up for county committee. Now, it's
Well,
a small thing.
congratulations.
It's a small thing, maybe, but I think it's symbolic of the fact that we came in really as outsiders and we were trying to navigate this political.
Snickered at,
Huh?
snickered at, laughed at.
Well, yeah, I mean, we were trying to navigate this political obstacle course, not really knowing what we were getting ourselves into necessarily. No one can fully until they experience it. You could read about it all you want, people tell you about it, right? You don't really know what you're getting into until you do it when it comes to this, certainly. So it's been a ride. And yeah, I think coming in, not asking for our turn, right? Not being afraid to challenge the status quo, not being afraid to run against incumbents, even,
Right.
you get looked at a certain way. You get looked at as an outsider. And it wasn't our intention to say we're going to take down the Queen's Democratic Party, nothing like that. But you
Right.
kind of, if you don't fall in line or do things a certain way, you're looked at funny. And
Right.
people will say things to you like, well, you'll never be supported. Even when, for example, we won the Democratic primary for city council in 2017, it was a fight to get endorsed by the leadership of the Queen's Party, right? That didn't come automatic. You would think they would endorse their nominee. That was a struggle. And
Right.
so it's been a journey, right? Trying to get to this point. And we did it not by asking for permission, not by asking, when is our turn? We did it by proving ourselves. I think we have established a solid base. We've shown that we can get a lot of support, particularly in the Rockaways and Howard Beach and certain areas here in South Queens. And it leaves people no choice but to respect you, right? And say, okay, the best decision here for all of us is to work together because we bring something to the table, right? We talked about Queens Link, going back to that. We ran a campaign largely on that issue. That was one of the main points of our platform. And getting the votes that we got, winning the nomination in 2017, all these efforts, I think, led in part, certainly, to the issue being taken more seriously by certain folks, right? People in office, people in leadership positions. They saw that the voters wanted this. They responded to that platform, and it needed to be taken seriously. And I think that's what we've been able to do. We've been able to earn a seat at the table. And so for them now to willingly put my name on a petition, look, I ran for county committee before, and I was elected to the county committee on my own. I actually petitioned myself for it, which is somewhat rare. People will do it, and now you have these reform groups trying to put slates together and whatnot. But I, on my own, said I'm running for county committee, before. So now I'm seeking re-election to the county committee, but with the Queens Democratic Party putting my name on their sheet. So when they petition, for their candidates, my name will be a part of that, part of those efforts in this part of Queens. And so I think that just speaks to how far we've come in this journey. 12 years later, here we are.
Yeah.
We're no longer, I guess, all the way on the outside, right? We've earned enough respect at this table.
Right, right. And then, like you said, people look at it a certain way when you come in a certain way. I remember the announcement at the what was it, the Young Democrats meeting, and there were some eye rolls and some snickers. But having that right to run for the office and wanting to represent your community shouldn't have to be something where you stand in line for. It's part of your right to do. It's as a citizen, if you want to get in there and mix it up, then you perfectly have that right. It's just like in hip hop. Doesn't matter how long you've been on top, you have to
Mhm.
defend your mic
Right.
at any chance. If anyone wants to come in and take a shot, then they can take a shot.
But you can understand it from the other perspective as well, as
Sure,
feeling threatened by someone, or you know what I mean? I mean, they may not be looking at it as cynically as that. They may not be looking at it like we need everyone to kiss the ring, and then, but they could also feel like some people come in and they don't know what to make of them because they come out challenging their power, right? And obviously that
sure,
is intimidating.
sure, absolutely, and I get it, and I can even see, even from I can even see from the side of saying, oh, well, people that come in that way, you might not understand the full system and how things work, and you could kind of mess up this delicate balance, basically mess up some of the things that we've got going on. I get that too, but that's still part of their right to come in
Right.
and make that challenge. And if you are in that position, um, and you've been doing it a long time and you do have that experience and know-how, and this person is able to come in and win, then maybe you weren't on your job the way you should have been. Maybe you
Right.
don't
Or,
have the
or,
support of the people the
or
way that,
maybe you should at least give that person the respect of
right,
saying, you obviously have earned support of people, right? I mean, look at what you've
right,
been able to do on your own. You won the
right,
primary, you got these votes. Even in 2012, we won in areas where people didn't think we would anything, right?
right,
So you were able to do that. You must have something you're at least worth talking to, working with. I mean, because ultimately
right,
these are primaries. We're talking about Democratic primaries here.
right,
You
right,
should be able to come together as a party, and you should want to work with the people who have support on the ground. That's how you're going to win elections. You continue to lose elections when you stay divided and you are stubbornly divided, right? You say,
right. Stubbornly
basically,
divided.
I'm gonna, what do you call that? Cut off your nose and spite your face type thing, shoot yourself in the foot, whatever metaphor you want to come up with. But this idea of, I don't like this person, I feel threatened by them, so I'm going to happily help them lose, see that they lose, even if it means I lose as well. We all lose, but I'd rather we all lose than see this person succeed in some way. I mean,
Right,
sometimes you get that, and that's not helpful to anyone.
right,
Aside from the opposition, right? The other
right,
side. So,
right,
at a certain point, and that's kind of the nature of the system. It's how it's supposed to be. Primaries can be competitive, and sure, they can be
right,
spirited and hostile at times, even bitter, whatever. But you should be able to put that aside and come together and say, all
right,
right, let's see how the chips fell, right? Let's see where we landed. Okay, I see you've got a strong constituency here. We should be able to work together now, as opposed to let's stay divided and just hurt all our chances. And so
right.
hopefully we're moving in that direction.
Because that constituency does consist of voters, real
Yeah,
people.
I'm
And
assuming that they want my voters, right?
yeah,
My
yeah, yeah,
supporters, people who think I have something to offer, and so well, it would only
absolutely.
behoove them for me to say, hey, listen, let's all get on board here. Let's work together. Let's do it.
Absolutely.
So, and
Absolutely.
for those who don't know, county committee is relevant. The reason why I even brought that up is because one of the jobs of the county committee is to vote on the party's selection for board of elections. So, similar to how you have at the federal level, the president would nominate someone for the Supreme Court or for a cabinet, let's say, then the Senate would have to confirm them, right? what the county committee does is nominate someone for election commissioner, and then the city council gets to confirm them after they're selected by the county committee. So each party has an allotment of commissioners on the board of elections. So the Democratic County Committee, one of their roles is to nominate a commissioner, obviously for the Democratic side, that the city council can then confirm or not. But one of the responsibilities, aside from if there is a vacancy, let's say your local state senator or assembly member were to step down in the middle of their term, there's going to be a special election to replace them. The county committee would have to convene and vote on the party's candidate for election, to fill out the remainder of that term. And so there are duties that it has internally within the party. It's a party position. It's a leadership position within the party, and the Democrats have it as well as the Republicans.
Right. Well, congratulations. So it's definitely a good thing, and like you said, it's definitely progress, kind of a milestone in a way as well.
I think so. I look at it like that, like a milestone, and hopefully a sign of positive things to come. Because, like we said, our goal was never to come out here and just be adversarial. We weren't opposition for opposition's sake, right? I think we were coming out with a message, and we thought that message would resonate to the voters. And over time, I think we've seen that it has. And like I said, I think we've earned our seat at the table.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So
we have this.
Let's wrap up with the poll from last week.
Right. So the poll from last week was, should Fani Willis be disqualified from the Trump Georgia election case over her relationship with the what is it? The special prosecutor.
Yep.
And so we got a poll here, and results were 16% said yes, 81% said no, 4% said I don't know. So overwhelmingly, people said no, she should not be disqualified over this. There were some hints at why people answered the way that they did. One person said if she's disqualified from the case, it won't be because of the relationship. It will be because the judge believes she lied about it under oath. That's one thing. People just straight up saying no. We had someone said the defense did not come close to proving their case for dismissal. I think the judge will see that was obvious and will keep Willis on the case. Another person said, I don't know. It's never a good idea to have an intimate relationship with those you work with. At least that's how I look at it. And we talked about that too.
Yeah. So how many votes total on this?
So this one, there was about 100 votes here.
Okay. Overwhelmingly saying no. So I've been watching this. Today, I think, was the third day of the hearing that they've done. They're really going hard on this particular hearing to disqualify the DA. Today, they had the divorce lawyer of the special prosecutor on the stand. And the judge, it seems, is really interested in knowing when the romantic relationship began. Now, you brought up that point last week. It's kind of a funny thing because, well, number one, okay, she hired him, right? They hired a special prosecutor. She says their relationship began after he was hired, but nonetheless, he was at a certain point rehired, and everyone agrees that when he was rehired, the relationship had already begun. So there's that. But you still have the question of whether he was hired in the first place because of this relationship potentially. The thing about that is, wouldn't that, though, speak to his financial benefit, if anything, not hers? Because you're trying to prove that the relationship put a financial benefit on them, and that's why they should be disqualified, right? So maybe he would be disqualified for getting that financial benefit. Would she be? I mean, would that have benefited her if, for argument's sake, she had a relationship with him first and then hired him?
There's the possibility, I think, and you raised it last time, that you know, the basically the money that he's getting paid to be the special prosecutor, if they're in a relationship and they're sharing that money, it's
Mhm.
ultimately going into her pocket,
True,
as well.
especially if right she didn't pay him back for these vacations and whatnot.
Well,
But
even
that
just
all, but that all happened after they
right,
admitted to having that relationship. So
right.
I'm trying to really get to the relevance of the timeline, the before part, right? If they
Well,
had
well, if they had a
before,
relationship before,
yeah,
it could be. I mean, if they had a relationship before, I think it's even clearer, because then it's like if you're sharing finances in that way, you're going to hire this guy that you know is going to help put money back into your pocket if you had that
those
relationship
trips,
prior.
those trips happened after the fact. They're all admitting that
Right.
they went on these trips after he was already hired and they were boyfriend and girlfriend. They're saying that happened after he got hired.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I don't know if I saw anything that would indicate what the financial benefit to her would have been prior to that point, prior to the point they're
Well,
admitting
prior to
to
that point,
together.
yeah, prior to that point, I don't think there would have been a financial benefit to her.
Right. But to him, certainly. And there's
Well, of
also an
course, to
ethical
him, because he's
question
getting
there.
hired.
Say what? Because he was hired,
Is
right?
it
So
a,
he would get the benefit, and maybe he should be disqualified under those grounds.
but I
No.
mean, I don't see how that would be. Are you talking about once the relationship started or just before the relationship started?
What do you mean?
I think just getting hired, it doesn't sound like that there was an issue just getting hired the
Well,
first
no. What
time.
I'm saying is, if he was hired and the relationship had already begun at that point,
Right.
then you can argue he was getting a financial benefit out of the relationship because he was getting paid
Right.
by the county.
Yes, you could also argue, depending on how they dealt with their finances, that she was getting a financial benefit too by putting money in his pocket if he's,
But was she putting money in his pocket? I haven't see. I didn't see
I
any of
mean,
that come out in the testimony.
putting money in his pocket by hiring him
Oh,
for
by
a job
hiring
that
him,
he
okay.
knows that he's going to be paying trips and things for her.
Oh, so
So
like she anticipated it. So even if it happened later on, she's having a long play in
no,
mind.
I'm
I'm going
saying
to
that
hire
if
him, and then months from now, maybe we'll go on trips, and he'll pay for it with that money that I'm
no, I
paying him.
think we might be talking two different situations. One, we're talking
Sure.
about if they had had a relationship prior to him being hired, or if they had a relationship afterwards.
Yeah.
So if they had one prior to being hired, then the potential is that one, that he's getting benefited because his girlfriend is in charge, so he's gonna, get
But he's
maybe
also getting paid, like we said.
getting
He's
paid.
getting a paycheck.
Right, but he's benefiting from that relationship because it's his girlfriend that put him on the job.
Mhm.
At that point, also she could get benefit too because the money's going into her partner's pocket,
Okay.
because he's getting paid, and so that means, and if boyfriend and girlfriend relationship, you often share finances. It's not always a cut and dry
Right.
difference between finances. So if you're making sure that he's getting a good job, then it's going to benefit you somehow. So I can see an argument in that point. If
Maybe
it
in the
happens,
future. It's funny because I was watching hours of the testimony, and all of the questioning was really about, at least about the financial aspects of it. It was
right,
about later on after they had admitted to being together and going on trips together and whatnot.
right,
It wasn't about, was he putting money in your pocket from the day that she hired you? You know what I mean? So it was all
right,
after the point at which they admitted that they were
right.
together. And so that's
Yeah,
why
I think
some people are questioning the relevance of when they got together. If they're already admitting that there was a point,
right,
and then after that point, there was this exchange of money, and she's claiming that she paid him back, and whether that's true or not, you can debate that. But
right.
this whole question, because the judge really seems interested in the question of when did their romantic relationship begin? Was it before she hired him? And so today you had this divorce lawyer who says he hasn't spoken to the client in 2 years, I think, but the judge rules that any conversation that he had with his client about that romantic relationship with the DA was not privileged. And so the divorce lawyer was compelled to testify about that. He said there was only one conversation, but he kind of got caught up because the believe it or not, the lawyer who filed the motion, right, the defense would have been on the Trump side, or one of the co-defendants actually, they filed this motion to disqualify. The lawyer who was preparing the motion ran a draft of it by this divorce lawyer and said, can you check it for accuracy? I want to make sure that what I'm writing in here is true.
Mm.
And the divorce lawyer, I guess, got back to her and said, well, you have all these monies that were allegedly paid, these different parties. it doesn't say how much I was paid. I think it was 74,000, whatever it is. But he wanted to clarify something in that motion about the monies that he was paid or something like that. But I guess she rewrote the motion in accordance with what he suggested. And then she said to him, like, does it look good? Is anything else inaccurate? And he said, looks good, apparently, in the email. And so now it's coming out in this testimony. She's saying, well, I sent you the motion and I said check it for accuracy. You only brought up this one thing about the payments that you received, but it also says in a motion that their relationship, I think, started, before. It has other accusations in there,
Right,
and you
right,
never
right.
told me that those were inaccurate, right? And so he's now trying to come back with, well, when I said it looks good and when I said it was accurate, I only meant my particular part of it, and so he's trying to kind of walk that back.
Walk back.
But then apparently there was a text. I guess they were texting at some point talking about the motion or whatever. And for some reason, the lawyer, I guess, in a text message to the defense's lawyer, said that the relationship between the DA and the special prosecutor began months prior to being hired. It was like, oh yeah, he said something like, oh yeah, definitely it was before. And for some reason he admitted that, or he stated that in a text exchange. And so he's being questioned about that. And his testimony today was that it was speculative. He only had that one conversation with his client, which was deemed not privileged, about their relationship ever. But the part about him saying when it began was not told to him by his client. He'd say, no, he just speculated that. And so the other lawyers really hit him hard. Why would you speculate to the defense attorney that their relationship began way prior to his being hired if you had no actual knowledge of that? And then at the end, they asked him, have you lied? They said, you're an officer of the court, you're a lawyer yourself. Have you lied, or have you said anything in the record that you feel you need to correct now? And he said, no, I don't. I gave my testimony. And they said, so you're saying that you've never lied to the defense attorney about the relationship? And that he paused for way too long, and he was like, He was like, I don't recall. I don't think that I lied. He said, I don't really think so. He was like, then he tried to explain it by saying, well, it was speculative. The part about them getting together earlier was speculative. So I guess he was trying to make it seem like he was trying to figure out whether that was technically lying or not, but it didn't make him look good at all. I mean, really, he should have just said, no, I didn't lie. If he speculated, he speculated, but he shouldn't have said, I don't recall if I lied or not, right? That just, the whole thing just, it makes him look like an uncredible witness. It does seem pretty damning in that regard. If the judge is really interested in whether this relationship began prior to the prosecutor being hired, that testimony doesn't do them any favors, doesn't do the DA any favors, because he did say to his defense attorney, oh yeah, certainly their romantic relationship began way before that.
And if it began before he was hired, she should have chosen someone else.
Was he chosen potentially because he was a romantic partner?
That's why she should have chosen someone else, because there's the potential for that question to be valid. She would, if they were together before he was hired, she should have chosen someone else. If she hired him after the fact, then I don't think there was a benefit for her or for him at the outset because they weren't together yet.
At the outset, potentially, but you still have the question of those trips that they went on, and she's saying that she paid
those went on, but those were after they were together already.
After they were together, right? But she said that she paid him back with cash, but had no documentary evidence of that, and it seemed kind of fishy. So if you don't believe that testimony, then it does seem like she was getting a financial benefit at that point because he was taking her on trips.
Well, here's the thing: is like, I think it's unlikely. It just because of the nature of relationships, right? Like, when's the last time you went out with your girlfriend and you paid for stuff and then you're like, oh, make sure you pay me back, or she's like, oh, I got to make sure to pay you back. It happens, but you can see times where it doesn't happen, and it's just not so common.
Right. Now, they were, of course, we're trying to make the argument that was a cultural thing. She said she got that from her father. Don't let any man give you anything. And she also said her father always keep cash in the house. I mean, she had an answer for everything. The question is, how much of it do you believe?
Yeah, she's of course she's got an answer for everything. I'm sure she prepared for her time and thing.
Yeah.
Here, I think there's a possibility that two things can be true in this situation, right? That he did pay for those things. She didn't pay him back. But that it was done in a way that It wasn't like they were trying to game the system. It was just a
Does that
normal.
matter though?
I
Yeah.
took my girlfriend on a trip,
Right, right,
and
right, right.
that was
Well,
just
yeah,
it.
and I think that that very well may be the case.
Right.
I'm not sure that's the legal question at the end of the
Absolutely.
day. Their
Right.
intent to game the system might not be the
Right.
relevant consideration here, right?
And
It
that's what I
should
think.
be, was the system game? Whether you wanted to or not, did you incur, or did you get a financial benefit as a result of this relationship?
Right. And that's what sounds like the reason for these stories about, oh yeah, my father told me this and I keep this cash and I paid him back. I made sure because of like trying to work a way around something that was initially something they kind of thought innocent. However, she is the DA. She has risen to that position. She should have known better, especially in such a high profile case. She should not have got involved with the special prosecutor until after the case if they were going to do that. Or she should have had him, if they were going to get into it, she should have dismissed him. Like there are definitely some conflicts of interest potential here.
Yeah, and if
Choice
you're also, if you're
regardless.
paying your share of money for everything because you're the DA and you want to avoid it looking like you're trying to game the system, then you wouldn't do it in cash with no record of it. You'd want to keep a record of it, right?
Right.
Because
Absolutely.
you'd want to be able to defend yourself later if any questions arose. So
Absolutely.
it was kind of fishy that she just said. And again, someone in that position, you would think should know better at the very least.
Right.
They should know better, right? Even if
Right.
it was innocent, even if their intentions were pure, they should
Right.
have known the stakes involved, right? They should have known
Right.
the scrutiny they would be under. They should have
Right.
dotted their I's and crossed their T's, did whatever they had to do to
Right.
not only be above board, but appear to be above board, right? Not have any questions arise about their dignity or their intentions or their motives, or whether they did something improper.
Right. And that's what's disappointing in this case. So, yeah, I think all of it is probably got some manner of truth to it. I think that it's only being the point's only being raised not because they think something actually improper happened, but because they're using it as a stall tactic and a diversion tactic to take the
It's,
news headlines out
mm-hmm.
of Trump doing
Yeah, oh
what
yeah,
he and at the same time it could have been something that was unintentional and innocent and
right.
all of it.
Okay, so talking about gaming the system, I think we should mention that part of it seems the
Sure.
tactic here is to flip this cake upside down, make it
That's
no
the
longer
point.
be about Trump, make it be about the prosecutor, that the DA in
Yeah.
Fulton County and her boyfriend and whatever, make that
Yeah.
be the story and inject more cynicism into our discourse so that
Absolutely.
and when he is convicted later, now you have a reason for people to say the whole thing was rigged. Look, she slept with this guy, and
Yep.
look, that was the reason why they went after him, because it was she convinced him to do it by having sex with him or whatever. It kind of just,
Absolutely.
right, it just throws some doubt into the whole process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah. So it's a mess.
So
Uh,
yeah, and then that's one thing that I thought to myself watching today. They're really turning this into a trial. It's a motion that was filed, a motion to disqualify. They're
right.
making this into a whole trial. They got these all these different witnesses on the stand. They've got all these
Sure.
27 exhibits of evidence. We want to mark this as defense as exhibit 29, Your Honor. It's like
Yeah.
they're acting like this is the trial when it's just a motion.
Right.
I understand sometimes these motions can take a long time and whatnot, but they're really,
Right.
really drawing this out and making it seem like this is the whole case, right? And
Right.
it's like a soap opera. We're here talking about it for 2 weeks now. It's a distraction. You know what I mean?
Right.
And should we be allowing ourselves to be distracted this much? I understand maybe there's relevance in raising it and filing a motion and whatever, but now this is the whole narrative. No,
Yeah.
notice we're not talking about the election being stolen in Georgia anymore.
Nope.
We're talking about this affair, and to be real, people, it's human nature, right? People like the salacious stories. That's what gets people talking more. The drama, the gossip, the soap opera stuff. That's more exciting to people than election interference.
Yep.
So I think they're playing into that as well, and it's working. It's kind of a shame, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a big shame, and I think it was intentional. You go and Google her name, and this is the only thing that comes up. It doesn't, it's not anything about details of the election interference. It's about this portion of the case. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's crazy.
Well, as we wrap up here, the Michigan presidential primary is underway. We've got the results that are coming in. I see here on the Democratic side, Biden with 78% and counting. Uncommitted, 16%. That's interesting. I guess that's similar to the none of the above approach that
Right,
Nevada employs. Uncommitted.
right.
Dean Phillips with 2%, Marianne Williamson with 2%. So yeah, these results are interesting as we watch them on both sides, and the polling as well. Like people kept saying, well, any Democrat other than Biden would beat Trump. But then you see polling recently that shows Newsom, for example, being crushed by Trump, Biden actually being the strongest Democrat, it seems. Then you had people saying that, well, if Haley were the nominee, she would crush Biden. Well, of course, things are going to change a lot as we head to November. But as of now, polling shows that with Kennedy running as a third party, enough Trump supporters would refuse to back Haley if she were the nominee and vote for Kennedy to split that vote and give it to Biden. And so a lot of interesting things happening. And of course, as these trials continue, I think we'll continue to see the numbers move in reflection of that. So a lot of moving parts here, but certainly fascinating, I think, to look at and kind of see how this takes shape day by day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we have come up on time, maybe even gone past time. We've been doing
Hey,
that a little bit lately.
good conversations take some time, but it's
Absolutely.
all good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we need to wrap up with the bottom line. Um,
Got a bottom line for us, Jay?
you know, I think the bottom line, let's go off of the nomination that you got there. I think that speaks to something that everyone should probably look at. Like you said, when the initial jaunt into politics came at just being very inexperienced about it, just having an interest and a desire to want to do something to help the community, to serve in that type of capacity. If people have that desire and feel that urgency, I think people should do it. And it also kind of connects to the same type of message that I gave when I did the TED Talk, is that if you have that feeling or that urging, there are people somewhere who are interested in you taking part in there, and just get in there and do it. If it's a slow start, if it's you don't get it right the first time, you can learn some of that by doing, and it's very important experience to have. It's very important to do. Um, and it kind of, I think we've quoted before, I don't think we've done it on here, but one of the Jay-Z lines when he said, far from a Harvard student, but it just had the balls to do it. It's just get in there and do it. Just don't overthink it too much, and just get in there and try to do it. If you're trying to make this difference, you're trying to make a change, you're trying to be a part of something, just put that effort in there and add that focus into it. So
Right. And learn as much as you can prior
absolutely.
to it, knowing that you're never going to be able to study. It's like, people say you can watch a million basketball games, but until you get in the gym and start shooting the basketball, you're never
Right,
going to be NBA ready.
right.
Similar to
But
that.
but
A
you
lot
at
of it
least
comes with
know where you're
experience,
supposed to be
but you
standing.
still you still want to learn as much as you can, and pick your
Yeah.
shots too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't advise people to just start running for things randomly, but do what you think is right. Take that stand, right? If you deem it necessary, if you think it's time, if you think you
Yeah.
have something to offer, figure out where you fit in, and yeah,
Absolutely.
don't let people tell you no. Don't let people stop you. And if
Absolutely.
you're an election lawyer, you know who to call.
Word up, word up. All right, and where can they find us?
They can find us everywhere, I believe. Anywhere podcasts can be heard, of course. Nuance with Mike Scala and Jay Carter. Get that audio pushed to your device automatically. Of course, we're on YouTube, Nuance with Mike Scala and Jay Carter. And then we have accounts on Instagram. We're on Reddit, so come check us out. The polls are on Daily Kos often, so come find us. Facebook Live every week, every Tuesday around 7 p.m. Eastern.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you. Shout out to everyone in the chat, and everyone who shows up weekly and participates and listens. So, you gonna
Yeah.
say it?
Yes, as always, we've got work to do. We'll catch you next time.